Saberites, Nonymous here, coming to you from the outer reaches. We've just gotten back on track here, making some more videos. I wanted to give a heads up out there to everybody watching the channel that we are still here and still going. To start things off, before we start getting into all the other stuff, one thing that has popped up a lot on the groups on the internet and everything has been a interesting question, and that is no practice better than practicing improperly? And this has caused a little bit of discussion out in the Saberland, as it were. We've had a couple of discussions on it in the Learners in Exile group and in our forum. Where I'm coming from it is pretty specific. Now, most of it stems from a quote from Vince Lombardi, who says, "Practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect." And this quote is kind of speaking to the phenomenon that if you practice something poorly, the benefit that you get out of it is going to be much lower than if you practice it properly. This is not in debate. If you do not practice correctly, or you practice wrong, or you practice something like that, you're not going to get the maximum amount of benefit out of your practice that you possibly could. Now, this brings up a couple of questions. How do you practice properly? And that really is a kind of big question, and it's really up to the teacher. It's the teacher's responsibility to make sure that their students are practicing in the way that they feel is going to give them the best benefit. Now, where I come out kind of against that axiom of perfect practice makes perfect is, number one, the idea of perfection, I think, is a little overstated. I don't necessarily believe in what we do there is such a thing as perfection. I see perfection and mastery and all of these other things not as things in unto themselves, but as goals, processes, verbs. So when I say something is being mastered, that is a verb. Somebody is in it, got their sleeves rolled up, hands in there, and they're really, really trying to get a good handle on what it is they're studying. That's mastery. That takes a while. You have to go through your basics. You have to make sure that you have all of your building blocks and everything in place. Now, practice is one of those very, very important things to us. It's the second word in our three-word kind of saying: patience, practice, and perseverance. And practice is very, very important. Now, it's not such a bad thing to say perfect practice makes perfect, so that every time you go into practice, you're thinking, let's make this perfect. The problem is when you run up against this, and that's really the topic. Some people will say, I didn't practice because I didn't want to practice it wrong, and practicing wrong is worse than not practicing at all. And that's just not true. Especially when you're first learning something. The best thing to do is get in there and practice it. And I've got news for you. For a good period of time in the beginning, you will be technically practicing it wrong. This doesn't necessarily mean that you are wrong, right? Or that you will forever be wrong, or that your practice is a waste of time. All it means is that you don't quite have the necessary building blocks or knowledge and skill to really make it into something that's going to really change the things that you're doing. So at first, you have basically, you're practicing your basics. And those basics are going to be difficult to get, especially if you're not one-on-one with a teacher right there. A teacher in a class can say, nope, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong, do this a little bit differently, blah, blah, blah. Right? When you don't have that feedback, this becomes a little bit more important. Now, if you practice something totally wrong, you shouldn't expect to then master that skill or reach your goal in any timely fashion. That is absolutely the case. But that does not mean that you should not practice, because not practicing is probably the worst habit of all. If you get into the habit of going, you know what, I'm going to just put practice aside today and I'm going to do something else, that creates a habit, right? And if that habit is allowed to fester, it doesn't even need to fester. I have trouble with that, just like everybody else does, finding a time to practice. You have all kinds of projects that you want to do, just getting a time to practice, to train, all of that, very, very difficult. Now, another little thing there is the differences between practice, training, and rehearsal. Practice, to me, means the process of really trying to improve yourself, going through things. So you want to be mindful of that practice. How am I doing this? Am I doing this right? If I'm not doing this right, how do I do it a little bit better? That kind of thing. Training is where you are preparing yourself for something that you do, whether it be a fight, a competition, a performance, something. And you generally do things that will pick out specific skills in there and help polish up those particular skills. So that's a totally different type of thing, right? And then you have rehearsal, where you have a specific set of things that you need to do within a certain amount of time, right? And they need to be done in this particular order, and they need to be done exactly this way. That's rehearsal. Now, rehearsal has the most chance of being what we call perfect, meaning it has parameters for which you to stay into, to say what is perfection. Perfection is doing these sequences in this order, in this sequence, or in this time. And if those are done, then that is perfect. And if you practice and rehearse that perfectly every time, yes, when you get up on the stage, it'll be right there. However, even if you don't practice it perfectly every time, the act of going through and trying to get it perfect is going to make changes in your brain which are going to help it become more perfect, right? We all have these things that we do every day that are just completely unconscious to us. We can do it perfectly every time without even thinking about it, and we don't even know about it until we try to teach that to somebody else. And then we can really see where that rehearsal really comes in. Now, practice is probably the least likely to be able to be called perfect, because there are so many variables. When we're practicing martial arts, we've got mechanical issues, we've got strategic issues, we've got intent issues, we've got all kinds of issues that we're kind of going with all at the same time. So it's not really realistic to think that we're going to be able to perfect all of those things in a practice session, right? The reason I shy away from the word perfect is because of this. When people, especially novices, especially people coming into something here, you have to do it perfect every time. That means something different than to them than it does to perhaps the teacher giving that instruction. As a teacher, I know that sometimes I get caught up in only seeing things from a teacher's point of view and not being able to see it from a student's point of view, which of course was my point of view for most of my career. And it shouldn't be something that we discard. We should be constantly thinking as teachers, what was it like to be a student? And this is why a lot of times we get into it with people who don't have any experience and are trying to teach. So we really encourage people to go out there and get experience being taught, right? And being taught this stuff or something like it, right? So that you can experience the issues of being a student and the trials and what's hard for you then and all that, so that when you deal with your own students, you can handle them a little bit better. So there's that. Now, with experience, your practice gets better and better and better. And that's what we want. But the only way that practice gets better is through repetition. Now, even if you practice something poorly at the beginning, the more you practice it, right? And you should be getting correction from your teacher if you're really practicing something like that. Or if you're giving yourself correction, you should be extremely critical into what you're doing. Practice is really a way for you to kind of feel your way through the dark. Okay? You're going to be making mistakes. That's the whole point of it. The point of practice is for it not to be perfect at all. You want to make all of your mistakes in practice, but you want to be aware of those mistakes. You want to take those mistakes and you want to turn them into assets. Right? Now, this is neurologically kind of what happens to us. If we practice something over and over and over again, neurologically, our body will try to find the most efficient and successful way of doing that. As long as we are following the prescriptions of our teachers and the people, if we're going from historical manuals or anything, if we're following those prescriptions, we shouldn't necessarily have to worry about us developing something really, really bad without us knowing it. There's another reason we shouldn't worry about that. It takes a long time to build up any skill, bad or good, right? If you practice something wrong for a week, you at least have the practice, the physical activity, and the thought process of moving through there. Also, you're getting motor learning from it, right? You're not doing the move correctly right away, but your body is taking in information and making calculations to try to find out what is the best way to do that. Now, you can ask your teacher for shortcuts, right? What am I doing here? It doesn't feel right. Okay, this, that, and the other. Right? Sometimes they'll tell you, no, it won't feel right for a while. You have to just do it over and over and over again until it becomes natural. And that's also something there. So when we really start looking at practice, the idea of perfection even being a part of it seems very odd. And as a teacher and somebody who has put in a whole lot of practice, I shudder when people say that not practicing is better than practicing poorly. Because I see lots of people practicing poorly and nothing seems to happen. Some people are better than others. I've seen people who are great at a certain sport and I watch them train and nobody else will be able to get any benefit from that training regimen. But somehow they do. Right? So it's a very subjective thing. Practicing is really the key, though. You can't learn it, you can't do it, and you can't fix it unless you're practicing it, unless you're doing it, right? You can think about it, and there's a certain level of changeover in there, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Practice is for making your mistakes. Practice is for finding out what works and what doesn't. And more importantly, what doesn't work. Anyway. Okay, so that's just a little thing on the practice. Hopefully you'll pick up something useful from that. We will be returning here with the videos and tutorials very soon. I apologize for being so late with all of those. Join us soon for our, this week, for our cosplay episode of Terra Prime Live. We will see you there Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Savings Time. I don't know which one it is. I believe that's -4 UTC. So please tune in for that. Other than that, we will see you next time. Have a great day. Happy sabering.